Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar to present the Policy Memorandum SP 38, 2017 entitled Compliance with and Enforcement of the Buy American Provision in the National School Lunch Program. FNS published this memo on June 30, 2017. I'm Sandra Foss, and I will be presenting today along with Dylan McKinnon and Courtney Howder. We work in the procurement section of the Program Monitoring Branch for all child nutrition programs at the Food and Nutrition Services in Alexandria, Virginia. Over the next hour, we hope to provide an overview of the Buy American provision. We will be walking through Memorandum SP 38, 2017. Then we will review some specific frequently asked questions we have received regarding the implementation of Buy American. Before we begin, we want to ask you to please use the chat box to input any questions related to this webinar. While we do not anticipate being able to answer your questions today, we will receive these questions for consideration of future guidance. Also, we will prompt you at the end of the webinar to consider submitting questions to your FNS regional office. Are we ready? Let's begin. We hope you have all had the opportunity to read and review Memo SP 38, 2017. The memo was written and published in response to a number of inquiries related to the details of the requirement that school food authorities purchase domestic commodities and products to the maximum extent practicable. Inquiries over the 51% domestic requirement, as well as enforcement of the Buy American provision in 7 CFR 210-21D. SP 38, 2017 replaced the prior memo, SP 24, 2016, by the same name, Compliance with and Enforcement of the Buy American provision in the National School Lunch Program, which was dated February 3, 2016. The guidance contained in the new memo, SP 38, 2017, provides several updates, including suggested contract language to be utilized in solicitations, and serves to reinforce the importance of the Buy American provision to our economy and its positive effects on small and local businesses.
SP 38, 2017 also tied the agricultural commodity or product to the National School Lunch Program food component, and it now requires that processed products must be over 51% domestic by weight or volume and not cost.
Authority for the Buy American provision is found in Section 104D of the William F. Goodling Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act of 1998, which added a provision, Section 12N, to the National School Lunch Act. This provision requires school food authorities to purchase, to the maximum extent practicable, domestic commodities or products. Can we take just a moment due to a technical? Thank you. We are back now. We understand that all of the connections for the audio are exceeded, and therefore many people are not able to hear. We apologize for this. We understand the popularity of this topic. We decided that we will proceed with the webinar And we are recording the webinar, so we will post this in the near future for those of you who cannot hear. We do understand that you can see the slides, so you're welcome to stay with us if you would like, even though you can't hear. But we will proceed this afternoon to complete the webinar. So with that, I'll pick back up where we were. This Buy American provision supports the mission of the child nutrition programs. The mission is to serve children nutritious meals and support American agriculture.
A benefit of the Buy American provision is that domestic foods support local and small businesses. Using domestic food products from local sources supports local farmers and provides healthy choices for children in the school meal programs, while also supporting the local economy. Requiring compliance with the Buy American provision also supports school food authorities working with local or small, minority, and women-owned businesses as required by federal regulations, such as 2 CFR 200.321. FNS also encourages purchasing domestic food products from local and regional sources when expanding farm-to-school efforts.
The Buy American provision applies to school food authorities located in the 48 contiguous United States. Contiguous is just a fancy word for states that are touching or continental states with shared borders. The Buy American provision is one of the procurement standards that these school food authorities must comply with when purchasing commercial food products served in the school meals program. Although Alaska, Hawaii, and the United States territories are exempt from the Buy American provision, school food authorities in Hawaii are required to purchase food products produced in Hawaii in sufficient quantities, as determined by the school food authorities, to meet school meal program needs as stated in 7 CFR 210.21d3. Likewise, school food authorities in Puerto Rico are required to purchase food products produced in Puerto Rico in sufficient quantities. And this is found under 42 U.S. Code 1760N4.
Section 12N of the National School Lunch Act defines domestic commodity or product as an agricultural commodity that is produced in the United States and a food product that is processed in the United States substantially using agricultural commodities produced in the United States. Report language accompanying the legislation noted that substantially means over 51% from American products. In this memo, we further clarified that the over 51% from American products must be by weight or volume. Therefore, over 51% of the final processed product by weight or volume must consist of agricultural commodities that were grown domestically. Thus, for foods that are unprocessed, agricultural commodities must be produced domestically, and for foods that are processed, they must be processed domestically using domestic agricultural food components that are comprised of over 51% domestically grown items by weight or volume as determined by the School Food Authority.
For agricultural commodities or products purchased by school food authorities, the food item within a food component is considered the agricultural commodity. FNS defines food component as one of the food groups which comprises reimbursable meals. These are meats, meat alternates, grains, vegetables, fruits, and fluid milk. For these definitions, please refer to 7 CFR 210.2 and 210.10. Any food processed by a winning vendor must contain over 51% of the product food component by weight or volume from U.S. origin. This definition of domestic products serves both the needs of schools and American agriculture. Products from Guam, American Samoa, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Northern Mariana Islands are considered domestic products under this provision, as these products are from the territories of the United States.
For school food authorities to successfully comply with the Buy American provision, implementation should be accomplished by including Buy American in documented procurement procedures, all procurement solicitations and contracts, and in bid specifications. For states that provide prototype procurement documents, please include the provision in these documents. Contract monitoring is essential to ensure that specified requirements in bid specifications, solicitations, and contracts are met. A publicly available resource for information on various food specifications is the Agricultural Marketing Services Weekly Market Report. This resource can also help to verify cost and availability of domestic and non-domestic foods using USDA data. This weekly report can be found at marketnews.usda.gov.
It is important to note that USDA foods comply with the Buy American requirements by definition. FNS encourages school food authorities to maximize their use of USDA foods. USDA foods are domestic and purchased from 100% domestic origin sources, as this is a long-standing USDA policy based on Section 32 of the Agricultural Act of 1935. However, remember, processed end products that contain USDA foods need to meet the over 51% domestic requirement by weight or volume.
There are limited exceptions to the Buy American provision, which allow for the purchase of foods not meeting the domestic standard as described above, i.e. non-domestic, in circumstances when use of domestic foods is truly not practical. These exceptions, as determined by the School Food Authority, are: first, when the product is not produced or manufactured in the United States in sufficient and reasonably available quantities of a satisfactory quality, or when competitive bids reveal the costs of United States products are significantly higher than the non-domestic product.
Before utilizing an exception, school food authorities should consider alternatives to purchasing non-domestic food products. For example, school food authorities should ask, are there other domestic sources for this product? Is there a domestic product that could easily be substituted if the non-domestic product is less expensive? For example, substitute domestic pears for non-domestic apples. Am I soliciting bids for this product at the best time of the year? If I contracted earlier or later in the season, would prices and/or availability change? Am I using third-party verification, such as through the USDA Agricultural Marketing Services website, to determine the cost and availability of domestic and non-domestic foods?
If a school food authority is using one of the previously discussed exceptions, there is no requirement to request a waiver from the state agency or from FNS in order to purchase a non-domestic product. Instead, school food authorities must maintain documentation justifying their use of an exception or exemption. FNS has provided sample language of such to be used as a reference in solicitation and contract documents. These are found in Question 5 of the SP 38, 2017 Memorandum and will be discussed later in this presentation. Monitoring of contractors by the School Food Authority and oversight by the state agency are critical functions in enforcing the Buy American provisions, including review of exceptions.
With regards to school food authorities to ensure compliance with the Buy American provision, the School Food Authority must ensure solicitation and contract language includes the requirement for domestic agricultural commodities and products, include the Buy American requirement in documented procurement procedures, solicitation, specifications, and contracts, retain records documenting any exceptions to Buy American, ask suppliers, such as manufacturers or distributors, for specific information regarding percentage of domestic content in processed end products. Include in the procurement process a requirement for certification of the domestic percentage of the agricultural food component of commodities and products.
For school food authorities, in addition to ensuring compliance with the Buy American provision, the School Food Authority must monitor solicitation and contract language to determine contractor compliance as required by 2 CFR 200.318B in order to ensure that contractors perform in accordance with the terms, conditions, and specifications of their contracts or purchase orders. Monitoring is also accomplished by reviewing products and delivery invoices or receipts to ensure the domestic food that was solicited and awarded is the food that is actually received. School food authorities also need to conduct a periodic review of storage facilities, freezers, refrigerators, dry storage, and warehouses in order to ensure that the products received are the ones that were solicited and awarded, and that they comply with the Buy American provisions.
Let's focus for a moment on state agencies. State agencies conducting procurement reviews in conjunction with or as a separate review from the administrative review process must ensure that school food authorities are compliant with the Buy American provision. During a procurement review, state agencies should check that solicitations and contracts contain the Buy American certification language as recommended in questions 6 and 7 of the memo SP 38, 2017, and provided later in this presentation, and review a sample of supplier invoices or receipts to determine whether the solicited for domestic foods were provided by the awarded contractor.
For procurement reviews, if the School Food Authority is non-compliant with the Buy American provision, the state agency must issue a finding and require corrective action, which may include the following: requiring contract amendments to include language to supply domestic foods, or a new solicitation if the contract amendment is determined by the contracting parties or state agency to be a material change. Attending a procurement training to increase compliance with procurement standards, including the Buy American provision, and fiscal action for repeat or egregious findings on a case-by-case basis with approval by the appropriate FNS regional office.
During an on-site administrative review, state agencies should look at the labels on a variety of food products in school food authorities' storage facilities, and if the state agency identifies non-domestic foods the state agency must request documentation justifying the limited exceptions previously discussed. To accompany this, the state agency will look at labels on a variety of food products. If non-domestic foods are found, request documentation justifying the use of an exception. If no documentation justifying the use of an exception is provided, the state agency will provide technical assistance and issue a finding and require corrective action, such as requiring a review of food deliveries for compliance, monitoring contracts to ensure the contracted domestic food components are delivered. Before accepting foods, ensure that exceptions have been approved for delivery, and fiscal action for repeat and egregious findings with approval by the appropriate FNS regional office. Both the administrative and procurement review teams should work together and communicate findings in order to provide comprehensive monitoring of the Buy American provision.
Now we are going to proceed to a few frequently asked questions regarding implementing and enforcing Buy American. We think you will find the answers and explanations useful in better understanding this provision and its implementation.
The first question is, how would a school food authority determine that an item is a domestic commodity or product?
In Section 12N of the National School Lunch Act, it defines domestic commodity or product as an agricultural commodity produced in the United States and a food product processed in the United States substantially using agricultural commodities that are produced in the United States. Reports accompanying the legislation noted that substantially means over 51% from American products. For products purchased by school food authorities for use in the child nutrition program, the food component of the product is the agricultural commodity. FNS defines food component as one of the food groups which comprise reimbursable meals. The food components are meats and meat alternates, grains, vegetables, fruits, and fluid milk. Please refer to 7 CFR 210.2 and 210.10 for full definitions and use of the terms respectively. Any product processed by a responsive vendor must contain over 51% of the food component by weight or volume from U.S. origin. So, agricultural commodities must be produced in the United States and agricultural products must be processed in the United States using agricultural commodities that are produced in the United States. In the case of agricultural products, over 51% of their agricultural food components must be domestic by weight or volume. When considering juice, for example, in order for the product to be considered domestic in accordance with the Buy American provision, the juice must contain over 51% of the juice or juice concentrate by volume from fruits or vegetables grown in the United States. FNS does not consider water, regardless of whether it is tap or bottled, to be a domestically grown agricultural commodity for purposes of this provision. Likewise, packaging and labor are not agricultural commodities. Again, for products purchased by school food authorities to be served in the child nutrition programs, the fruit or vegetable component of the product, by volume, is the agricultural commodity. For fruit or vegetable juices, in order to be considered responsive, the juice provided by a vendor must contain over 51% of the fruit or vegetable component of the juice by volume from U.S. origin.
The second question is, does the Buy American provision apply to entities that purchase food on behalf of school food authorities?
And the answer is yes. Any entity that purchases food or food products on behalf of the School Food Authority must follow the same Buy American provision and exceptions that the School Food Authority is required to follow.
The next question is, are all agricultural commodity or food products purchased using the nonprofit food service account subject to the Buy American provision?
Again, yes. School food authorities must ensure that all agricultural commodity or food products procured using funds from the nonprofit food service account comply with the Buy American provision. Pursuant to Child Nutrition Program regulations, all federal funds, all money received from children as payment for program meals, all proceeds from the sale of competitive foods, and all other income generated by the school food service must accrue to the nonprofit food service account. As a consequence, the entire nonprofit food service account becomes subject to federal procurement standards. Therefore, all agricultural commodity or food product purchases made from the nonprofit food service account are subject to the Buy American provision, subject to the limited exceptions noted in the memorandum.
Our next question is, what can a school food authority do to comply with the requirements of the Buy American provision?
To ensure compliance with the Buy American provision, the School Food Authority must ensure that solicitations and contracts include the requirement for domestic agricultural commodities and products. They include this requirement and its documented procurement procedures, and they retain records documenting any exceptions. Examples of specifications that school food authorities may use in solicitations and contracts to comply with the Buy American provision include utilizing the Buy American definition in 7 CFR 210.21d in all food product specifications, invitations for bid, and requests for proposals for food products, contracts, purchase orders, and other procurement documents issued. Require a certification of domestic origin for products which do not have country of origin labels, and including the following sample language. The district, or state agency, or territory participates in the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program, and is required to use the nonprofit food service funds to the maximum extent practicable to buy domestic commodities or products for program meals. A domestic commodity or product is defined as one that is produced in the United States and is processed in the United States substantially using agricultural commodities that are produced in the United States as provided in 7 CFR 210.21d. Additionally, school food authorities are required by 2 CFR 200.318b to monitor contractor performance to ensure compliance with all contractual requirements. This includes compliance with the Buy American provision. School food authorities can also require their suppliers to provide certification of domestic origin on food products delivered and on invoices submitted as discussed in more detail in questions 6 and 7 of SP 38, 2017. For example, school food authorities may require vendors to provide a certification of domestic origin for all food products listed in all procurement documentation, from a bid or proposal to receipts and invoices. School food authorities may deem a bid or response unresponsive and ineligible for contract award for noncompliance with the terms and conditions of contract award if such certifications are solicited for but not included. Further, the school food authority may establish penalties including contract termination if vendors fail to comply with the Buy American provision and no documentation of any exception exists.
Moving on to our next question, how can school food authorities comply with the requirement to retain records which should include documentation of exceptions in adhering to the Buy American provision?
This slide shows that school food authorities should use to document the justification for the use of an exception. This would be included in solicitations and contracts to ensure the school food authority complies with the requirement to retain records documenting any exceptions to the Buy American provision. Exceptions to the Buy American provision are very limited. However, an alternative or exception may be approved upon request. To be considered for an alternative or exception, the request must be submitted in writing to a designated official a minimum of X days in advance of delivery. The request must include the alternative substitute that are domestic and meet the required specifications, listing price of the domestic food alternative substitute, and availability of the domestic alternative substitute in relation to the quantity ordered, and the reason for exception, limited or lack of availability or price, and include the price, and the price of the domestic food product, and price of the non-domestic product that meets the required specification of the domestic product. School food authorities may document exceptions by maintaining records of communications between them and their food supplier. This may include emails, documentation of telephone communications, etc. The documentation must be maintained for review by the state agency during procurement reviews of local agency procurement practices. One resource school food authorities and state agencies may use in order to document exceptions is the market news report shown earlier that is available from the Agricultural Marketing Service. The Agricultural Marketing Service provides free, unbiased price and sales information on farm commodities, and that's at marketnews.usda.gov. Using this website, school food authorities and state agencies can find third-party verification of cost and availability of domestic and non-domestic foods. Further, school food authorities may use the information to communicate alternatives with food suppliers and document purchase decisions.
This slide shows actions needed to retain records of documentation for approving exceptions, which can include communications with a food supplier on the availability of alternative domestic foods considered and the justification for the exception, if applicable. Specifically, was the exception based on the cost or availability of the quality or quantity of the domestic food?
The next question is, how should a school food authority document the domestic commodity food components for a processed end product?
This slide shows sample language that may be used to obtain vendor certification of the domestic food component. Language should be tailored to the needs of the contracting parties. There is space for the supplier to fill in the name of the commodity or product and the specific amount certified that the agricultural commodity or product was produced and processed in the United States and contains over 51% of its agricultural food components by weight or volume from domestic sources.
Our next question is, how should a school food authority document domestic commodity food components for a processed end product?
The answer is, using the same language on the prior slide, the school food authority is asking the supplier, manufacturer, or distributor for specific information about the percentage of U.S. content in the processed end product In order for school food authorities to be able to document the domestic content, they should include in their bidding process a requirement for certification. Similar to the prior language, this may state, we require that suppliers certify the food product was processed in the United States and certify the percentage of U.S. content by weight or volume in the food component of the processed food product supplied to us. School food authorities may also include the following statement in the bidding process. We require bidders to certify that product XYZ, and you would provide the name, was processed in the United States and contains over and specify the percentage of by weight or volume. But remember, it must be over 51% of the agricultural food component from a domestic source, with space for the supplier to fill in the name of the product, its percentage of the domestic agricultural component by weight or volume contained therein. State agencies should also include such language in any prototype solicitation documents and contracts provided to school food authorities.
The next question is, can a food product from a U.S. agricultural product, which is manufactured in another country, be purchased using nonprofit school food service funds?
The answer to this question is no. Section 12N of the National School Lunch Act defines domestic commodity or product as one that is produced and processed in the United States, substantially using agricultural commodities that are produced in the United States. This means that the product must be processed entirely in the United States and must substantially use domestic agricultural commodities. A large number of foods received by schools state on the label that they are packed in the United States. Non-domestic foods packed in the United States or non-domestic foods in packaging produced in the United States do not meet the Buy American requirements. Therefore, absent a justified limited exception, a domestic agricultural product purchased using nonprofit food service account funds must be processed in the United States.
And our final question for discussion today is, can FNS or a state agency provide a list of foods that are not available domestically and therefore not subject to the Buy American provision?
FNS has not issued such a list. Although the Federal Acquisition Regulations, commonly known as the FAR, contain such a list, this applies to procurement by the federal government only. Each school food authority should determine on an individual basis whether domestic alternatives exist first, and if not, whether an exception is warranted. Exceptions are warranted only when 1, the food product is not produced or manufactured in the United States in sufficient or reasonably available quantities of a satisfactory quality, or 2, competitive bids reveal the cost of a United States product are significantly higher than the non-domestic product. Again, there is not a specific amount or percentage that is considered significantly higher, and it is the school food authority's responsibility to determine the threshold. Records and documentation must be retained justifying any exception as outlined above. School food authorities can maintain documentation of exceptions for domestic foods that are prohibitively costly or not available in sufficient quantities, and presents this documentation during reviews by the state agency.
And this is the conclusion of our webinar today. We thank you for your time and hope the information that was shared was useful. We are aware that many questions may arise related to this topic, and we hope you have submitted these through the chat line or that you will submit further questions to your FNS regional office. Once again, thank you for your time. Have a good day and happy Thanksgiving.
We will be publishing another webinar in the very near future, especially for those who were not able to hear the webinar this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time today. Bye-bye.